It is said that there are moments when the sea forgets to move, when the wind loosens its grip, when the moon rises without reflection or ripple, and the water becomes a single, broken breath. On such nights, the surface lies still as polished glass, holding the sky in perfect silence, as though the world itself has paused to listen. Beneath that calm skin, far below the reach of storms or sunlight, something waits. A city, not shattered by rage or swallowed by violence, not torn apart by fire or erased by sudden flood, but lowered, slowly, deliberately, into quiet. The city rests where sound softens and time loosens its meaning. Streets of pale stone stretch outward in patient lines, their edges rounded by drifting sand. Archways curve gently, no longer sharp with purpose, but softened by centuries of passing water. Temples remain standing, their roofs intact, their doorways dark, guarding chambers where light has not entered since memory learned to fade. It is said the city chose this descent. Ancient sailors once whispered of it. They spoke in low voices on decks washed silver by moonlight, eyes fixed on the dark water below their hulls. Some claimed they saw shapes moving beneath the surface. Not creatures, but forms too straight, too deliberate to be born of nature. Others heard echoes rising upward, faint and distant, like bells rung far away, muffled by depth and devotion. They did not dive. They did not cast nets. They let the silence remain intact. For the city was not meant to be disturbed. Whispers tell us that long before the sea claimed it, this place stood upon dry land, aligned with the sky rather than the horizon. Its builders were watchers, not of enemies or borders, but of stars. They studied the slow turning of the heavens, the breath of constellations, the way time revealed itself not in days, but in cycles too wide to name. Some believe the city listened too closely. The stars, after all, do not only shine, they remember. And there are those who say that the city learned something it was never meant to hold. A pattern etched not into stone, but into understanding. Knowledge that bent the idea of beginning and ending. Knowledge that did not burn or break, but bowed, gently, heavily, upon those who carried it. To protect it, the city was sealed not by walls, but by water. As the sea rose, it did not rush. It entered like a veil drawn slowly across a sacred face. Homes were emptied. Streets were swept clean. Doors were left open, as if the city expected return, but not pursuit. No screams marked the moment. No battle scarred the stone. Only surrender. Now, beneath the unbroken surface, chambers open into chambers, each holding the quiet breath of centuries. Statues stand with algae-veiled faces, their expressions softened beyond emotion. Some hold objects, bowls, discs, spirals, whose meanings have slipped free of language. Others raise empty hands towards ceilings painted with symbols, now blurred by salt and time. Water moves through these halls as if it belongs there. It flows through doorways, like incense through a temple, slow and reverent. It rests in corners where offerings once lay. It presses gently against walls etched with star-marked lines, preserving their shape even as it erases their clarity. Here, water is not destruction. It is a guardian. It keeps the city from footsteps. It keeps the city from questions. In deeper chambers, where the pressure grows heavier and the light thins into blue dusk, inscriptions still linger. They speak of cycles and thresholds, of gates that open only when memory fades. Some markings suggest the city was never lost, only waiting. Pause between one age and the next. Others hint at contradiction. A city devoted to knowledge, choosing silence. A place built to observe, deciding to sleep. The deeper one imagines drifting, the more the city feels intact rather than ruined. Columns still stand straight. Floors remain unbroken. It is as though time itself agreed to move more slowly here, respecting the city's wish to remain whole. There is no urgency in this place, no demand to uncover, no insistence on truth, only the sense of being allowed to glimpse. Above, the sea continues its calm vigil. Waves form and dissolve without ever revealing what they pass over. Sunlight dances on the surface, unaware that it traces the outline of towers and plazas below. Storms may rage far away, but here the water remains composed, as though honoring an ancient vow. Perhaps that is the city's final gift. Not knowledge, but restraint. A reminder that not all things are meant to be brought back into the light. Some truths are safer when held by silence. Some histories are complete precisely because they are unfinished. As the mind rises slowly back toward the surface, the city fades again into blue shadow. Its streets do not vanish. They simply recede, folding back into patience. The echoes soften. The bells fall quiet. The water closes gently over stone. The sea becomes smooth once more, unbroken, unchanged. And beneath it, the city waits, holding its breath, keeping its secret, while the world above forgets and sleeps. It is said that there are some places where time loosens its grip without warning. Not in ruin or collapse, but in quiet forgetting. At dawnless twilight, when the sky holds neither night nor day, the harbour appears. It is carved from pale stone, sand beige and softly weathered, stretching outward with patient grace. Long piers reach into water that no longer remembers ships. Steps descend into stillness, their edges worn smooth by countless feet that once moved with purpose, and then never returned. The sea here does not breathe as it should. There is no pull, no retreat, only a glassy hush, marked by the moon. The first question arrives gently, like a thought not meant to disturb sleep. Who was meant to arrive here? And why did they never come? This harbour does not feel abandoned. It feels completed. Its form is ceremonial, aligned not with trade winds or tides, but with the slow arc of the heavens. The longest pier points not toward open water, but toward the moon's highest resting place. Channels curve inward, like spirals drawn by a patient hand. Even the stones seem placed with intention, as if each knew its role in a greater silence. Whispers tell us this harbour was never meant for many journeys. Only one. In forgotten corners of the earth, records remain, fragments etched on tablets, references buried in songs without melody. They speak of vessels that arrived only once, carrying no cargo, no merchants, no soldiers. These ships came bearing knowledge rather than goods, memory rather than wealth. What that knowledge was, no one agrees. Some believe it was a story too heavy for land to hold. Others say it was a truth that could only cross water, because the sea was once considered alive, awake, listening, capable of keeping secrets better than stone or fire. To sail here was not commerce, it was passage. The harbour then was not a port, but a threshold, a gate between states of being, between knowing and releasing, between the world that speaks and the world that listens. As the narrative drifts deeper, the geometry of the harbour reveals itself more clearly. Curved walls enfold the water like open arms, sacred moorings and stone rings polished smooth, weight without rope or purpose. Channels carved into the seabed trace spirals that draw the eye inward toward a central basin where the water grows darker, quieter. Marked by the moon, the harbour feels less like architecture and more like a ritual frozen in its final breath. It is said that long ago, when the sea still rose and fell here, the tide would enter the harbour only on certain nights. Nights when the stars aligned just so. Nights when lanterns were lit, not to guide ships, but to guide memory. Lantern light once breathed warmth into stone chambers, carved along the harbour walls. These chambers remain, empty now, their ceilings blackened by old flame. Iron hooks still hang where ropes once rested. Grooves in the floor mark the paths of movement. Careful, deliberate, reverent. The listener is guided through these spaces slowly. Footsteps echo, though no one walks. The sound repeats itself in alcoves, shaped to carry breath and voice, as if designed to remember what was spoken there. But the words are gone. Only the echo remains, repeating sounds that no longer exist. Over time, something changed. The tide began to withdraw, not violently, but politely, as though the sea itself understood that its role had been fulfilled. Day by day, the water retreated just enough to elbows more stone, then more, until the harbour stood complete, then dry. No storms are recorded, no walls were broken. The sea simply stepped back. Some believe this was a vow, that after the final arrival, the water promised never to cross the line again, that it would guard the memory by absence rather than presence. A silence stronger than any wall. Emotion drifts here from gentle intrigue into something softer. A melancholy that does not ache but lingers. This is a place built for arrival, yet it knows only departure. A harbour without waves, a gate without crossing. The contradiction remains unresolved, and perhaps that is its purpose. The listener senses that whatever arrived here was not meant to stay, and whatever left was not meant to return. The stone remembers hands, voices, movement, but it does not mourn them. It rests. Beneath the silence, the harbour waits without expectation. The water still laps faintly at the edges, just enough to remind the stone that it has not been forgotten entirely. But it never crosses the threshold, never climbs the steps, never reclaims the spiraled channels. It is as if the sea remembers something the land has forgotten, and chooses not to speak of it again. Perhaps the knowledge carried here was not dangerous, but complete. Perhaps it was not meant to be lost, only laid down. There are truths that grow heavier the longer they are held, and some must be returned to the listening dark. As twilight deepens, moonlight traces the harbour's lines one last time. The piers cast long shadows across still water. The chambers remain dark, their echoes sleeping. Nothing moves. And yet, Nothing feels empty. The harbor stands as it was meant to stand, not waiting for ships, but holding space for memory. A place where arrival ended the need for return. Perhaps it was never meant to be used again. Perhaps some gates closed not to deny us, but to protect us. And so the stone harbor remains, forgotten by the tide, remembered by the moon, resting in its chosen silence, while the world beyond continues to drift, unaware of what was once set gently down and left to sleep. It is said that beneath certain waters, far from the memory of shorelines and names, there are places where the world remembers how it began. The invitation comes quietly. A submerged temple rests below the surface, its roof broken not by violence, but by permission. Stone beams have parted just enough to allow pale shafts of light to descend, slowly, rhythmically, like breaths drawn by the earth itself. The light does not rush. It drifts downward in columns of gold and blue, touching stone, sand, and silence with equal reverence. Here, columns rise from the seabed as they once rose from dry ground. Their carvings, spirals, stars, and symbols of joining have softened over time, yet remain unbroken. They do not resist the water. They receive it. Beneath the silence, the temple waits. This was never a place of defense. It was a place of welcome. Whispers tell us that long ago, when the shape of the world was still uncertain, this temple was built to honor the first memory, when land and sea were not yet separate, when boundaries had not hardened into permanence. Ancient tradition speaks of a time when water was not feared, but revered as the breath from which all forms emerged. The temple stood at the waterline, balanced between states. At dawn and dusk, when the light softened and the horizon dissolved, rituals were performed. Priests and keepers, now known only through absence, stood barefoot where waves met stone. They spoke prayers not upward, but downward, into ripples and foam. To pray here was not to ask. It was to remember. Scrolls once described the sea as listening, not as a metaphor, but as a truth. The water, they said, held memory longer than stone, carried echoes further than wind. Words spoken into water did not fade. They dissolved, becoming part of everything they touched. Marked by the moon, the temple followed a different rhythm than the world beyond it. Offerings were placed not on altars raised high, but in bowls set low, meant to be brushed by tides. Songs were not sung aloud, but breathed gently, lips close to the surface, voices surrendering themselves to motion. Then the sea began to rise. But there was no panic, no record of resistance. Some believe the rising water was foretold, written into the very proportions of the temple. That its builders understood this place was never meant to endure in the open air. The sanctuary was designed not to be preserved, but to be fulfilled. When the water crossed the threshold, it did so like a guest long awaited. As the chapter deepens, the listener drifts inward, following corridors now filled with slow-moving currents. The chambers are still whole. Stone walls drive inward protectively. In alcoves, offerings remain where they were placed, bowls filled with fine silt, their contents indistinguishable from the sea itself. Time has softened everything without erasing it. Inscriptions trace the walls, barely legible beneath coral veils and mineral bloom. Symbols repeat, spirals within circles, stars dissolving into waves, gates opening into nothingness. They speak of a beginnings that never ended, of cycles without edges. Here, the contradiction reveals itself fully. A sanctuary meant to be lost, a prayer never meant to be heard. Myths linger like suspended breath. Some say that deep within the temple lies a final chamber, sealed not by stone but by intention. A place where the last prayer was spoken. A prayer not meant for gods, nor for people, but for the world itself. That prayer, they say, asked not for protection or prosperity, but for balance, for a return to the moment before division, to be land and water again, without names. To protect this prayer, the temple was given to the sea. Fish move through these halls now, unafraid. They pass between columns like silent guardians, their bodies catching fragments of light. Sea plants sway gently, tracing the same rhythms once marked by chanting breath. Nothing here feels invaded. Everything belongs. The water presses softly against stone, learning its shape, learning its patience. It fills every chamber without urgency. It rests where voices once rested. It listens. Emotion does not rise here. It settles. There is a calm reverence in how the sea inhabits the space, how it carries the weight of centuries without disturbance. No bubbles break the surface. No current hurries the moment along. Even sound feels distant, as though wrapped in cloth. As the listener drifts deeper, the light begins to thin. Gold gives way to blue, blue to shadow. The roof above fades into suggestion rather than form. Yet the temple remains intact, whole in a way that ruins never are. Perhaps because it was never ruined. Perhaps it simply changed its breath. Beneath the silence, the final chamber is never shown. It does not need to be. The story does not demand unveiling. The mystery rests not in what is hidden, but in why it remains hidden. Some voices, it is said, only echo when we are ready to listen. As depth increases, the light finally releases its hold. The shafts dissolve into soft darkness. The temple's edges blur gently, as though the sea itself is closing its eyes. Above, far above, the surface continues its quiet motion. Waves pass without knowing what they shelter. Moonlight glides across water that listens endlessly, carrying echoes nowhere at all. The temple remains below, praying in its own way. Not with words, not with sound, but with stillness. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps it was always meant to remain exactly where memory fades. And as the listener drifts towards sleep, the water continues to listen, patient, ancient, and complete. It is said that beneath the shoreline, where the land exhales into the sea, there are places built not to endure but to soften. Places where memory is not shattered, but eased into stillness. The invitation begins with shelves of stone. They descend in patient tiers, not fashioned from wood or reed, but carved directly from the earth, cool, pale, and enduring. Each shelf curves inward, following the quiet geometry of a chamber that seems to breathe with the tide. Where scrolls once rested, tablets now lie, arranged with care. Their surfaces are etched with names that history no longer speaks aloud. The air here feels heavier, as if words once carried have settled into the walls. This is a library built beneath the shoreline, designed to be forgotten slowly rather than destroyed. It was never meant to burn. It was never meant to fall. It was meant to be lowered, gently, into a place where sound thins and edges blur. Whispers tell us that the builders understood something rare. that forgetting can be an act of reverence. Legend suggests the names carved here belonged not only to people, but to cities that vanished without ruin, to stars that shifted beyond recognition, to moments of time so precise they could never return. To remember them, it was said, invited sorrow. Not because they were tragic, but because they were complete. So they were given to the sea. In forgotten corners of the earth, old fragments speak of a ritual known simply as the quieting. It was not a ceremony of grief, but of release. Names were spoken once, softly, then etched into stone and placed upon these shelves. As the tide rose, water crossed the threshold and entered the library without force, touching the tablets as a hand might touch a sleeping brow. Marked by the moon, the sea accepted them. As the listener drifts deeper into the chamber, light dims and sound softens. The ceiling arches overhead, its surface traced with faint celestial markings. Spirals, constellations, gates that open inward. Shafts of pale light descend through narrow openings above, but they do not reach every corner. Shadows gather respectfully between shelves, as though preserving privacy. Water flows through the aisles like breath. It moves slowly, almost thoughtfully, erasing edges but not meaning. It polishes the stone without urgency. Sediment settles in gentle layers, veiling some inscriptions while leaving others faintly visible. Words dissolve into pattern. Names become texture. Meaning loosens its grip. Here lies the contradiction that lingers like a held breath. Knowledge preserved in a place no one can read it. The library does not demand discovery. It does not announce itself. It waits. Some believe this was the highest form of protection, not concealment by walls but by surrender, to place knowledge where it could exist without being used, where it could remain intact without influence. As the narrative deepens, the listener glides past tablets etched with lines so worn they feel older than language. Some names appear only as partial curves, interrupted by coral bloom. Others remain crisp as if etched yesterday. Time behaves unevenly here, choosing what to soften and what to spare. Beneath the silence, there is no sense of loss, only rest. The water muffles every sound. Even the imagined echo of footsteps fades before it can begin. Fish pass quietly through the aisles, their movements slow and unhurried, as though aware they are guests in a sacred place. Their shadows ripple across stone like drifting punctuation. It is said that once, a single keeper remained behind as the tide rose. Not to guard, but to witness. They did not carry a name to be etched. They carried only breath. When the water reached their chest, they exhaled into the chamber, offering the final sound the library would ever hear. Then the sea closed gently. Now, the library rests beneath calm waters, patient and untroubled. It does not dream of being found. It does not hope to be remembered. It holds what the world chose not to carry. As the listener moves toward the heart of the chamber, the shelves narrow. The tablets grow fewer. The space grows quieter. Light thins into blue hush, then deeper shadow. At the center, a single tablet rests alone upon a low stone pedestal. Its surface is smooth. No inscription can be read. No name can be traced. Whether it was worn away by water or never etched at all remains unknown. The tablet reflects faint light without revealing anything in return. This is where the story slows to stillness. Perhaps this tablet once held the most important name of all. Or perhaps it was left blank intentionally, a reminder that not every meaning requires a mark. The reflection is gentle and unresolved. Perhaps forgetting, too, is a form of wisdom. The library does not answer. It does not explain. It simply remains, holding what was entrusted to it, without judgment or desire. As the listener begins to rise, retracing the path through quiet aisles and softened shelves, the water continues its slow, steady motion. It carries echoes nowhere at all. The names do not call out. They do not stir. Above, the sea remains calm. The shoreline breathes. Waves pass without knowing what rests beneath them. The sunken library of quiet names remains below, veiled and intact, where memory fades by choice rather than force. Patient, complete, and at peace. Some voices, it is said, only echo when we are ready to listen. And some names were never meant to be spoken again. It is said that far from the reach of harbours and names, where the sea grows heavy with memory, there stand towers beneath the water. They rise slowly from the seabed, their stones softened by time, their silhouettes barely visible through layers of blue hush. Each tower holds a bell, suspended in perfect balance, neither touching the walls nor the floor. They do not rust. They do not crack. They wait. Once, long ago, these bells marked time for a coastal city now gone. Morning began with their low call. Evening folded itself gently around their fading echo. Lives move by their rhythm. Birth, labor, rest, return. The bells did not command. They reminded. They reminded the city that time was alive, breathing, passing through everyone equally. But now, beneath the silence, the bells no longer speak. They were never shattered. They were never stolen. They were lowered, deliberately, into quiet. Waffers tell us that this city believed sound was powerful enough to bend the unseen. Words, music, even the simple ringing of bronze could disturb the balance between what is known and what should remain veiled. The bells were sacred instruments, tuned not only to hours, but to harmony itself. Marked by the moon, the city listened carefully to itself. And one night, it is said, the bells rang out of rhythm, not loudly, not violently, but wrong. The sound did not echo as it should, the air did not receive it. The tone lingered too long, as if caught between moments. Those who heard it felt a subtle unease, a sense that something within the city had shifted. Balance, once disturbed, is difficult to name. The elders gathered. Records were consulted. Old scrolls etched with stars, cycles, and the measured breath of time. They spoke softly of a teaching nearly forgotten. When sound no longer serves harmony, it must rest. And so, the decision was made. At dawnless twilight, when the sea lay calm and reflective, the bells were lowered from their towers. Not removed, not destroyed, but carried downward with care. Stone chambers beneath the city were opened. The bells were suspended once more, this time in water rather than air. The sea accepted them without resistance. As the chapter deepens, the listener drifts among these submerged towers. Water moves slowly here, pressing gently against stone. Currents slip through arched windows where voices once echoed. The bells sway ever so slightly, responding to the movement around them. They ring only in memory. There is no sound now, only the suggestion of it. A pressure in the chest, a faint vibration that never reaches the ear. Time, unmarked, begins to loosen its structure. Days fold into one another, nights pass without announcement. And gradually, the city follows the bells. Without sound to divide moments, life grows quieter. Rituals soften, movements slow, the harbour empties. Houses are left with doors open as if expecting return. The shoreline retreats. Or perhaps the people do. Some believe the city chose to descend, to join the bells in their vow of silence. Others say the sea rose, honoring the quiet the city had offered. There are no records of panic, no evidence of struggle, only absence. Now, beneath the surface, the towers remain. The bells hang within them, perfectly centered, their surfaces dulled to a deep, patient sheen. Algae traces their edges, small creatures drift past without fear. Nothing here feels abandoned. Everything feels finished. Emotion settles into quiet sorrow, not sharp, not aching, but deep and still. The listener senses time passing without markers, without divisions, without sound. Moments lose their edges. They blur. They become continuous. Perhaps that was the intention. The contradiction lingers like a held breath. Bells meant to guide life now guide nothing at all. Or perhaps they guide something else. Perhaps they guide forgetting. As currents shift, the bells move slightly. The water parts around them. For a moment, it feels as though a sound might be born. Not a ring, but a presence. But nothing comes. The silence holds, chosen, complete, enduring. The sea carries this quiet endlessly, never repeating it, never breaking it. Above, waves move, as they always have. Wind passes. The moon marks its cycles. But below, the bells remain suspended outside of time. Perhaps they still mark something, just not for us. Perhaps some sounds are meant to end, so something deeper can be heard. And as the listener drifts towards sleep, the towers fade into shadow. The bells sway once more, gently, faithfully. No sound is born, only silence, full, ancient, and at rest. It is said that in forgotten corners of the earth, there are roads that were never meant to arrive anywhere. The invitation begins on land, beneath a sky softened by dusk. A road of pale stone stretches forward, its surface worn smooth by countless steps. The stones are fitted with care, their edges rounded by time and touch, as if every foot that passed carried intention rather than haste. Dust gathers in shallow seams, glowing sand beige in the fading light. The road does not lead to a city. It does not bend toward a gate or a horizon crowned with towers. It slopes gently, steadily into the sea. The first question arrives like a whisper brushed across the mind. Who walked this road knowing it would not return them? Marked by the moon, the road seems ceremonial. Its width is constant. Its centerline aligned with the slow arc of the heavens rather than the needs of travel. On either side, low stones rise and fall like a patient rhythm, suggesting boundaries that guide rather than restrain. There are no ruts from carts, no marks of commerce, only the quiet polish of feet, repeated again and again, until the stone learned the shape of devotion. Beneath the silence, the road feels prepared. Whispers tell us that long ago, this was not a route of departure, but of trust. Historical fragments, etched lines on weathered tablets, half-remembered verses in coastal songs suggest the road was ceremonial, a final path for those entrusted with endings. Not endings of life, but endings of cycles, of names, of roles that could not be carried forward without imbalance. To walk this road was not exile, it was completion. The narrative follows the stones downward, where the air cools and the light shifts. As the road nears the shoreline, the color deepens from sandstone yellow to muted gray-blue. The stones grow darker, colder beneath imagined feet. The sound of wind thins. The smell of salt begins to mingle with dust. There are no signs to mark the threshold. No posts. No inscriptions demanding pause. The road continues, uninterrupted, as though land and sea were never separate enough to require permission. At the water's edge, the first wave meets the stone without resistance. It is said the sea accepted the road as it accepted the walkers, without question. As the listener travels the road in imagination, the transition is gentle. The last breath of air gives way to the first cool pressure of water. Light fractures into ripples. The world shifts from clarity to hush. The stones remain beneath, steady and certain, guiding the way downward. Beneath the surface, the road does not crumble. It does not break. It continues. Here, the sea grows deeper and bluer, a dusk sky turned inward. The road's edges soften as sand gathers along its sides. Small currents trace the seams between stones, carrying fine grains that settle like quiet punctuation. The sound of the world above dissolves completely. Emotion deepens into reverent stillness. There is no urgency in this descent, no sense of loss, only a slow surrender to a quieter state of being. The listener feels the shift not as fear, but as release, from air to water, from light to muted blue, from the need to arrive to the permission to end. Symbols emerge along the way. Carvings appear faintly on stones, half veiled by silt. Spirals that turn inward, star-marked lines that seem to fade as they descend. These markings are not instructions. They are acknowledgements. Reminders that the path is known, even if its destination is not. The contradiction lingers like a held breath, a journey designed without destination. And yet, the road feels complete. Some believe that those who walked it carried things that could not survive the next turning of time. Memories too heavy, knowledge too sharp, names that had fulfilled their purpose. To bring them back would have been to disturb the balance. To release them here was to return them to the listening dark. Beneath the silence, the sea grows stiller. The water presses gently against the road, learning its slope, its patience. Fish pass overhead, unaware they swim above a path once walked with intention. Their shadows ripple across stone like passing thoughts. As depth increases, the light thins to a soft, unwavering blue. The stones ahead blur slightly, not from distance, but from a growing quiet that smooths edges. The road begins to narrow, its sides giving way to open sand. Then, without ceremony, it ends. The final stones sink beneath a pale bed of sand, their lines dissolving into the seabed. No marker stands to announce the conclusion. No wall rises to deny passage. The road simply vanishes, as though it has said all it needed to say. Above, waves pass gently. Unaware, they move over a path once walked with purpose. The surface remains bright with reflected sky, busy with wind and light. Nothing on the water hints at what lies beneath. The listener pauses here, at the place where the road becomes memory. Perhaps it was never meant to be found again. Perhaps the destination was not a place, but a letting go. Beneath the silence, the sea keeps its vow. It does not uncover the stones. It does not erase them entirely. It holds them in balance, neither lost nor revealed. Some voices, it is said, only echo when we are ready to listen. As the mind drifts upward once more, the road fades into blue shadow. The sand settles. The water grows luminous again. The path remains below complete and undisturbed, while the world above continues without it. And somewhere between land and sea, between breath and hush, the road rests, having led exactly where it was meant to lead. It is said that beneath the quiet waters, where the sea holds its breath and light thins into blue prayer, there rests a crown, not shattered, not stolen, not claimed by conquest. It rests upon a throne of stone, now buried beneath the sea, its surface softened by drifting sand. The crown's edges remain sharp, its metal darkened to a patient sheen of oxidized bronze and faded gold. No hand reaches for it, no current disturbs it. It waits, without hunger, without memory of command. This is where the story begins. Long ago, before the sea crossed the thresholds of palaces and halls, there was a kingdom whose power had grown too loud. Not in cruelty, but in weight. Its borders expanded, its voice carried far, and its crown became heavy with expectation. The land felt the strain first. Stone walls cracking softly, rituals losing their stillness. Stars watched with too much desire rather than reverence. Whispers tell us the kingdom sensed this imbalance before history could name it. Marked by the moon, the elders gathered not to plan defense, but to listen. They listened to the land's breath, to the rhythm of tides, to the silence between stars. Old scrolls were unrolled in chambers lit by torchlight shadows, their ink faded, their words careful. They spoke of a teaching nearly forgotten, that power, when held too tightly, fractures what it claims to protect. Some believe the crown itself was the problem. Others say it was the forgetting of why it existed at all. And so, the unthinkable was chosen. Not collapse, not resistance, but relinquishment. The crown would be lowered, not removed in shame, but returned with reverence. As the chapter deepens, the listener drifts through the kingdom in its final days above water. Palaces were emptied gently, not looted. Treasuries were left intact, doors opened wide. Gates that once marked authority were unsealed, their hinges loosened, their purpose released. There were no proclamations shouted from balconies, no urgency in the air. Only calm preparation. The sea was invited inside. It entered slowly, respectfully, as though aware that it had been summoned rather than unleashed. Water crossed marble floors and climbed stone steps without resistance. Curtains of silk dissolved into pale threads. Painted walls dimmed into memory. The kingdom did not fight the tide. It welcomed it. Emotion moves here from curiosity into solemn acceptance. As the listener imagines, drifting through these submerged halls, there is no sense of ruin. Columns still stand, ceilings remain intact. The geometry of the kingdom holds its shape, even as water fills every space. Fish glide through archways where banners once hung. Light filters down in soft shafts, tracing patterns across floors that once felt the weight of ceremony. This was not a fall, it was a laying down. Beneath the silence, the crown's journey unfolds. On the final day, when the water had reached the heart of the palace, the throne room remained untouched. The throne stood at the center, carved from stone older than the kingdom itself. The crown was carried there, not by a ruler, but by the land's keepers, those entrusted with endings. It is said no words were spoken. The crown was placed upon the throne one last time, not as a symbol of rule, but as an offering. Then the doors were opened to the sea. Water flowed in, surrounding the throne, lifting dust, dimming light, softening sound. When the crown disappeared beneath the surface, the kingdom's voice fell silent. And in that silence something healed. The contradiction remains gentle and unresolved. A kingdom remembered for leaving rather than ruling. As the listener drifts deeper, the throne room rests intact beneath the sea. The crown still sits where it was placed. Coral traces its edges lightly, never obscuring it fully. The metal does not tarnish further. It does not call out. It does not command. It simply is. There is a strange peace here, a sense that ambition has loosened its grip, that the need to be seen, to be known, to be remembered, has softened into acceptance. The sea presses gently against the throne, learning its shape, learning its patience. Above, the surface world continues. Waves rise and fall. Empires elsewhere claim and collapse. Names are written and erased. But here, beneath the silence, the kingdom remains complete. Not because it endured, but because it chose to end. Some believe the sea was not meant to erase the kingdom, but to keep it from returning. Others whisper that one day, when the world remembers how to listen, the water may step back again. The crown would still be there, untouched, waiting without ambition. But the story does not promise this. It lingers instead on the stillness, on the idea that power does not always need to be inherited, that some crowns are meant to rest, that some kingdoms serve their greatest purpose by stepping aside. The final reflection returns to the crown itself. It rests beneath the sea, light glancing softly across its surface. No hand reaches for it. No voice names it. It is free of weight now, free of expectation. The throne holds it without judgment. The water holds it without desire. Perhaps this was the truest form of rule the kingdom ever knew. To lower its crown, to release its name, to become memory rather than command. As the listener drifts towards sleep, the throne room fades into blue hush. The crown remains, patient and complete. Above, the sea listens endlessly, carrying echoes nowhere at all. Perhaps it was never meant to rise again. Perhaps some port is strongest when it chooses to rest. It is said that beneath the quietest waters, where the sea loosens its grip on motion, there are markings no sailor was meant to read. The invitation opens not with a horizon, but with a floor. A stone map lies etched into the seabed, broad and patient, its surface smoothed by time. At first glance it appears blank, only pale stone dusted with sand, scattered shells resting like forgotten punctuation. But when the light shifts, when the angle of the sun or moon bends just enough, lines begin to reveal themselves. Curves emerge, channels unfold, depths whisper their presence. This is no map of land. It names no cities. It traces no borders. It offers no direction for feet or sails. It marks only movement, currents, pressures, the slow breathing paths of water itself. Whispers tell us this map was not drawn to be followed by people. It was drawn for the tide. In forgotten corners of the earth, fragments of lore speak of a time when the sea was not merely crossed, but consulted. When water was understood as a living memory, capable of learning, of returning, of remembering routes long after coastline shifted. The builders of this map, it is said, believed the ocean needed guidance, not control. So they etched intention into stone. As the listener drifts closer, the lines become clearer. They do not run straight. They spiral and bend, widening and narrowing with deliberate grace. Some curves trace shallow paths, others plunge suddenly into darker grooves. Each turn feels measured, as though shaped by breath rather than hand. Marked by the moon, the map reveals itself only at certain hours. By day, it lies quiet and unreadable. By night, when light grows soft and forgiving, it awakens. The narrative suggests the map was created to guide something vast and unseen. Not ships, not creatures, but the tide itself. Some believe the map was meant to teach the water where to go, where to rise, where to rest, where to withdraw without harm. A way to keep balance when the world's edges shifted. Others whisper that it was designed to guide something older still, something that moved within the sea long before names existed. The listener follows the map's flowing paths, drifting along its curves in imagination. Each line feels purposeful. There is no excess, no decoration. Only the quiet confidence of knowing exactly what must happen and when. Emotion moves gently from intrigue into awe. This map does not ask to be used. It does not invite mastery. It simply exists, offering guidance to a force that does not need instruction, yet listens anyway. Symbols appear faintly along the edges, star-marked points where currents converge, spiral knots where depths change suddenly. These are not warnings. They are acknowledgements, places where the sea's memory folds back on itself. Beneath the silence, the contradiction deepens. A guide, meant for water, not people. Why carve such care into stone? Only to place it where no one would see it. Some believe the act of drawing the map was itself the ritual. That the moment the final line was etched, the ocean learned its course. That the stone did not command the sea, it reminded it. As centuries passed, the builders faded. Shores shifted. Languages dissolved. But the map remained, pressed into the seabed, waiting for light. Water flows over it now, following the grooves without resistance. Currents deepen where lines grow dark. Tides soften where curves widen. The sea remembers. The listener senses a deep calm here. A stillness, not of absence, but of completion. The map does not change. It does not adapt. It holds the memory of movement, allowing the ocean to pass again and again, learning itself through repetition. At certain moments, when storms pass far above or moons pull gently at the world, the water pauses over the map, as if listening, as if confirming its path before continuing on. Perhaps this is why some places flood gently while others are spared. Perhaps this is why some tides retreat with grace while others linger. The map does not explain. It does not justify. It simply rests. As the chapter draws toward its close, the light begins to shift. The angle changes. The lines soften. Curves dissolve back into stone. What was once visible becomes suggestion again. The map fades. Not because it is gone, but because it has said what it needed to say. The seabed returns to quiet texture. Sand settles into the grooves. Shells drift back into place. The water continues on its course, carrying the memory forward without revealing it. The listener is left suspended between knowing and not needing to know. Perhaps the map was never meant to be found. Perhaps it was only meant to be remembered by the sea. Above, waves move across the surface, guided by forces unseen. Below, the stone rests, holding a pattern older than language. Some voices, it is said, only echo when we are ready to listen, and some maps were never drawn for us at all. It is said that in forgotten corners of the earth, there are gardens that never withered. They did not dry beneath harsh suns. They were not trampled by war or swallowed by neglect. Instead, they learned a different way to live. The invitation opens quietly, unexpectedly. Stone planters rest beneath the water, their edges softened by time. Terraces descend in gentle steps, each one traced with pale growth. Pathways curve through open space, no longer lined with flowers, but with coral fans and drifting weeds that sway as though remembering wind. This was once a garden built to mirror the stars. Its designers believed the heavens were not distant, but patterned, repeating themselves in smaller forms below. Each terrace aligned with a constellation. Each planter marked a cycle of light. Blossoms once opened in sequences that echoed the turning of the sky, blooming not by season alone, but by moon and star. Marked by the moon, the garden breathed with the night. Now, beneath the silence, breathes again, differently. As the listener wanders through this transformed space, there is no sense of loss. Stone paths remain intact, their surfaces polished by centuries of water rather than feet. Low walls still define beds where soil once rested. But life has rewritten the rules gently, without force. Coral clings where petals once fell. Seagrass grows where roots once drank rain. Anemones open and close like flowers remembering how. Whispers tell us that when the sea began to rise, the garden was not abandoned. There are no signs of panic, no broken gates, no overturned planters. The water entered slowly, patiently, touching leaves and stems, cooling stone, dimming light. Plants that could not adapt faded without struggle. Others changed, and those changes were not mourned. The builders of the garden, it is said, believed life was not defined by the form, but by rhythm. That survival was not resistance, but listening. When the first shoots bent toward water instead of air, no one intervened. They watched. As the chapter deepens, the listener drifts through terraces where geometry still guides growth. Circular beds now host spiraled coral. Straight paths are softened by drifting sand, but their direction remains clear. The symmetry has not vanished. It has translated. Here lies the contradiction, gentle and profound. Beauty that survived by changing completely. The garden did not preserve itself. It transformed. Fish move slowly between planters, their bodies catching faint shafts of light that filter down from above. They glide along paths once walked in silence, as though following an ancient memory they do not understand. Their presence feels ceremonial rather than accidental. Beneath the silence, the garden feels awake. Stone markers remain at the center of each terrace, etched with star-marked symbols now blurred by growth. These stones were never altars. but reminders, points of alignment where sky and earth once met. Now they serve as anchors for life that breathes water instead of air. The emotional arc remains calm, tinged with gentle wonder. There is no urgency to reclaim what was, no desire to restore the garden to its former shape. The listener senses that doing so would diminish it. This place is not a ruin, it is a continuation. Currents pass through the garden like slow breath. They stir fronds and soft weeds, carrying nourishment without disruption. The water does not uproot, it supports. It presses lightly against stone, learning its contours, learning its patience. Where memory fades, adaptation remains. Some believe the garden was designed with this ending in mind, that its creators understood the sea would eventually arrive and built the space not as a monument, but as a lesson. A living demonstration of how to let go without disappearing. As depth increases, light grows bluer, softer. Shadows lengthen across terraces. Yet life does not retreat. It thrives quietly, unannounced. Color persists. Not bright, not loud, but steady. The listener pauses near a central basin, once a reflecting pool. Now it is filled with clear water and drifting life. The surface above shimmers faintly, catching patterns of light that echo stars long unseen. The basin still reflects, but now it reflects movement rather than sky. Perhaps that was always its purpose. In the final moments, the listener drifts back along the paths, watching slow-moving fish pass where flowers once opened at dusk. The garden breathes steadily, untroubled by its transformation. It has not forgotten the stars. It has found another way to honor them. Above, waves pass gently, unaware they move over a place that chose to live differently. The surface world continues, unchanged by this quiet miracle below. Perhaps it was never meant to remain as it was. Perhaps life's greatest beauty is found not in preservation, but in permission. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and some gardens learn to breathe underwater. It is said that far below the places where waves remember their names, there is a light that has never learned to set. The invitation begins in deep water, where sound loosens and direction becomes a suggestion rather than a rule. Here, darkness does not arrive suddenly. It gathers gently, layer by layer, until even memory feels softened. And then, almost imperceptibly, a glow appears. Not a flame, not a star, a reflection. It hangs in the water like a held breath, pale and unwavering, as if dawn itself has been asked to wait. The light does not spread, it does not travel. It remains where it was placed, caught endlessly between arrival and release. Whispers tell us this glow rises from a chamber below, an ancient space designed to hold the last sunrise of a vanished world. Beneath the silence, the sea carries the story without urgency. Long ago, when the horizon still belonged to land, and the sky answered names spoken aloud, there was a world that knew it was nearing its final morning. Not through prophecy or disaster, but through a quiet understanding shared among stone, wind, and tide. The stars shifted their patience, the day shortened their reach, and those who listened knew the light would soon leave the surface forever. They did not attempt to preserve the world. They chose to preserve its beginning. In forgotten corners of the earth, fragments of memory remain, etched references to a sanctuary built not for worship, but for remembrance. A chamber carved deep into stone, aligned with the path of the rising sun. Its walls were smoothed, its angles measured with care. The intention was not to capture light, but to cradle it, to let it rest. As the chapter deepens, the listener drifts slowly downward, guided by the glow. Ruins pass on either side, arches collapse inward, columns leaning toward the path as if listening. These structures do not feel abandoned, they feel attentive, as though the entire city below the waves has turned its attention toward the light, waiting with it. Stone corridors open into vast halls where ceilings curve like sleeping skies. Carvings line the walls, spirals dissolving into rays, stars folding into circles, symbols that suggest not endings, but returns. The water presses gently against everything, learning each shape, carrying the light forward without disturbance. Emotion deepens into quiet reverence. This is not a place of mourning, it is a place of keeping. The glow grows clearer as the listener approaches the chamber. It does not brighten, it clarifies. Its edges sharpen just enough to reveal that it is not light itself, but the memory of light, a reflection caught at the precise moment before change. Some believe the chamber was sealed at the instant the final sunrise touched the world, that the light entered once and was never allowed to leave. Others whisper that the sun never rose again above that land, choosing instead to remain below, sheltered from forgetting. The contradiction remains sacred and unresolved, a sunrise that never rises. Within the chamber, the light rests against a curved wall of pale stone. The surface is polished smooth, as if prepared for this purpose alone. The glow touches it softly, creating a halo that does not move with the water. It does not flicker. It does not waver. It waits. Beneath the silence, the listener senses the weight of time suspended. Outside the chamber, centuries pass. Tides shift. Continents drift. But here the moment holds. Dust settles slowly on the floor. Fine grains carried by distant currents. They fall through the light like quiet snowfall, never dimming it, never breaking its calm. The water itself seems to slow, as if aware that speed would be a kind of disrespect. Some believe this chamber was the final act of a civilization that understood impermanence too deeply to resist it. Rather than cling to survival, they chose to honor transition, to say farewell, not with fire or monument, but with gentleness. Marked by the moon above, the sea continues its cycles, unaware of what it shelters. As the chapter moves toward its closing, the listener remains with the light. There is no explanation offered, no revelation demanded. The glow does not speak. It does not promise return. It does not warn of loss. It simply exists. And in its existence, it asks a question without words. What if some endings are meant to be kept, not resolved? Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the light begins to dim, not as a flame dying, but as a reflection adjusting to shadow. Its presence softens, receding into the stone without vanishing. It is not extinguished. It is simply waiting, folded back into patience. Above, far above, the sea remains calm. Waves pass without knowing they carry dawn beneath them. The surface reflects the night sky faithfully, unaware that a sunrise rests below its reach. Where memory fades, the light remains. Perhaps it was never meant to rise again. Perhaps it was meant to stay Xobe, so the world could move on. Some voices, it is said, only echo when we are ready to listen, and some light waits beneath the waves.